Hello and welcome to the STU podcast. I'm your host today, Arkash Jain, and today I'll be talking to Fahir Han. After doing investment banking at Deutsche Bank for 7 years, Fahir Han has held positions at Rothschild and BNP before starting his own manufacturing company, running a sustainable venture builder, and founding and managing various data analytics and sustainability startups. Fahir talks about the challenges of making a company, the skills he learned from investment banking that translate to real life, and imparts advice to young entrepreneurial minds on how to build your ideas.
Hey! Been trying to meet you. Hey!
Where are you calling from?
Istanbul, Turkey. I'm in Istanbul today.
Oh, really?
Right.
Were you guys affected by the
Yeah.
earthquake? I'm so sorry to hear about the earthquake.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's actually southeast of Turkey, which got affected by the earthquake, not the west side. So Istanbul is on the northwest, but it was devastating for the country. It actually impacted about 15% of the population. So
Wow, that's
it was
amazing.
pretty bad.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
thoughts and prayers to everybody in Turkey. Do you know anybody who got
Thanks so
affected
much.
or any of your
Not personally, but I know that a lot of people who live in Istanbul had families there, and so they were actually very worried.
so sorry to hear that. I
No
hope,
problem.
you know,
Thank you.
the international community's been really vocal about it, and I hope, you know,
Yeah.
everything's fine.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, what's just in general, what's new with you since we last met in January?
Yeah, working on my startup and on my advisory work to startups. So it's ongoing work. We are progressing our idea, and I don't know if you were there when we got the investment. So we had a pre-seed investment for our startup. I think you knew about that. And
Yeah,
when we met in Boston, and then now we're working on actually further progressing the idea, and then we'll pitch it to investors again in a couple of months.
that's amazing. So I remember you was it $500,000 or $50,000 you guys won
No,
to?
it's just 150,000
That's still
pounds
amazing.
that we got. Yeah,
Gotcha.
just
So um uh what was your startup about? This is the podcast part. So, now I
yeah,
start
sure,
getting into some of the questions,
no
but yeah.
problem. Yeah, the startup is actually helping against climate change. It's not direct help, but we are a company which provides data for these financial instruments called green bonds.
Hmm.
And investors who buy these green bonds, like insurance companies, pension funds, actually need better data than what is being reported right now. And the data is impact data. So how much carbon emissions has their investment saved, right? How much water was saved, how much renewable energy generation has been achieved. Metrics like this, they need these metrics to show their investments impact. And there's basically a problem with the data right now. It's really hard to access the data,
Hmm.
and it's also there are certain discrepancies in the data which need to be cleaned out and corrected. Basically, that is our ideas about giving these investors better data.
So why do you think there's discrepancies in the data? Why is it so bad at the moment?
I think the most important thing is the fact that there's limited knowledge about how to collect the data, how to measure the data, and how to report it. And when companies are trying to collect the data and report them, they're making mistakes themselves without realizing. And these mistakes need to be cleaned out to figure out what's actually the real impact rather than just a few numbers. So that's what we're trying to solve.
So it basically helps company um, quantify their carbon impact in a way. Am I correct?
Better
And
quantifying.
for their
Yeah.
operations. So um, your clients, are they big companies like going from all across the verticals, like Nike, which might be sports? You might have a
Yeah.
bank like Goldman Sachs. Is that your clientele, or do you have a
Yeah. So
specific
our
clientele?
clients would be the investors or the buyers of the green bonds or green loans that Nike or another company is actually issuing to make green investments. So the data is required by these investors who actually want to know the impact that they've made much better. And corporations are trying to do that, but they're not doing a really good job. And investors basically want to have access to better data and also a data source where they can find all the data that they need. Right now, they have to go into each company's report, figure out where the number is, take it and put it into some kind of Excel file or another type of format, and then try to report it themselves. So we're going to try to solve all these problems.
That's really interesting. Of course, nowadays with climate change, this has just become really important for companies to know what their impact is.
Yeah.
And of course, in the United States, we've been having a lot of backlash when it comes to ESG, even though, it might be a data analysis company like yours. Some states are saying that it's Vogue investing. Is it as bad in Europe because you're based in Istanbul, but a lot of your operations are in London as well? So how's the political climate towards companies in your domain?
Yeah, the EU is making a big progress around this, and there are new regulations that are coming and have been put in place recently, like EU taxonomy, or regulations like SFDR for financial advisors. So there's a lot of progress going on in Europe, and I think US is a little bit behind, but they will also get there.
Why do you think so?
Yeah.
Do you think the bipartisanship is gonna find a way through I guess better business? Because uh we know
Yeah.
that at Davos there was a big conversation about how to um, I guess, counter the Inflation Reduction Act and all the green incentives the United States was giving to all these electric companies. And we're still having some talks going on between American officials and Europeans on how they can keep European companies inside within Europe instead of them going offshore. So
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of it maybe sound very harsh, but ignorance about how late we are in correcting what we've done to Earth. Once you realize how late we are and how much we have to do, then you just become an advocate, and that's how I have become an advocate of it. And there's no going back from there once you realize it. However, whatever your political views are, I think we need to make sure that everyone understands the danger that is coming and looming. And however your political views are, once you see and are educated about this danger, you will actually, maybe not as fast as I would expect people to get there, but slowly people I think will get there, and there will be drastic measures taken by governments to encourage the path to net zero. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term net zero, but it's basically when we as a world become net zero, emit zero emissions on a net basis.
Hmm. Yeah, and we all strive for that future to come as soon as possible
Yes.
because even right now, actually in Boston, I'm calling from Boston, and um, the winters have not been as cold as one would imagine. Of course, you were at Georgetown. You remember how cold it used to get, and this year the temperatures have been really warm. So
Yeah.
um, I'm hoping that more companies like yours come into play, and the change is faster. Now, just going back to what you said that um, once you see it from a certain perspective, that how much damage we've done, there's no other um, I guess, option but to become an advocate. And of course, you have done a lot in terms of being an advocate for these companies. Of course, you're a co-founder for Fidata, which is the data company, but you're also the CFO for Faraday. Is that am I saying it correctly?
Yes,
Faraday?
correct. Yeah, I'm actually head of strategy and CFO for Faraday at the same time. Yes.
So what's Faraday doing different?
So Faraday is actually also related to climate change. The services that they provide, they have two services. One is they help companies measure their energy consumption remotely and also in a much easier and better way. And they also have a carbon accounting software where they help companies collect and report their carbon emissions. So yeah, the energy part, energy consumption part is also related to carbon footprint of the companies, because the more you reduce your energy consumption, the less carbon footprint you have. And because of that, providing these two services are kind of related to each other.
So of course, with Faraday, Fidata, and you're also the co-founder, is it, of Carbon 13, which is a venture builder for
Yeah,
investing and funding new
so
startups.
basically, Data came out of Carbon 13.
Hmm.
So Carbon 13 is a venture builder which brings people together who wants to create new companies against climate change. And so I met my co-founder through Carbon 13,
Hmm.
and we came up with this idea. And with the assistance of Carbon 13, we created a company and received an investment. So
So yeah,
it's like a program. Yeah.
that's really interesting. And did you have any sort of domain expertise? Because right now you're doing a lot, obviously. Did you have some sort of domain expertise in climate investing or this area in
No,
general,
not
or did
really.
you build
No,
it?
no, not really. But I actually have, um, finance experience from finance, right? And what we are building right now is in the financial markets. So that's the value that I'm bringing in.
So, what was your experience in finance?
So I actually started my career in finance. After graduating from Georgetown in Washington, D.C., I started working in New York for Deutsche Bank as a banker. I was in the capital markets division, and then I worked there for 5 years, and then I moved to London with Deutsche Bank. We were part of a group called Special Situations Group, where we were financing big acquisitions of companies, mostly asset-backed or securitized transactions. And then I also worked for Rothschilds and also for BNP Paribas in London. And so in total, I worked about 14 years in finance. So that's where my background in finance comes from.
What motivated you to stay in investment banking for so long? Because I know people, usually my friends at BU, we've had investment bankers from HSBC, Goldman Sachs come on the podcast before, and a common theme between what they say is, I'm going to stay here for 2 years and then move on to probably a hedge fund, some operations, because it's a really taxing job. You're working 100 hours a week. How does it change as you move up the chain, and what keeps you motivated to stay in that industry for so long?
I think what you're learning is very important in that kind of a job. By being in like investment banking, you basically see a lot of different aspects of work life. Not only you know and learn more about finance and financial markets, but you also work with big companies, big corporations. So you learn how to work with big corporations, how to present to them, how to talk to them, how to sell to them. And in the meantime, you are doing a lot of work which progresses your critical thinking, like analysis of companies' financials and modeling of their financials. And at the same time, while you're doing deals, you're learning about legal side of things, like legal documentation, how you read a legal document, how you put together a transaction, and how you actually make changes to get what you need in a deal. So all of these things, this nonstop learning, of course, as you say, accompanied by a lot of work, right? A lot of taxing work, is what keeps you going. And I think as an investment banker, you actually, when you graduate from banking, right? You may not have to, but if you graduate from banking, you have this skill set, these tools in your hand, which you can apply to real life corporations, situations, or anything you want to. Because whatever you do in life, you will need to make presentations. You will need to talk to big companies or important people. You need to show your critical thinking capabilities. You need to read documents, legal documents. You need to do modeling to understand opportunities. So it helps you a lot with, that kind of job helps you a lot to get all this skill set.
So I want to ask you two following questions. The first one will be pertaining to the skill set, and the second one is more specific to how you applied your specific knowledge of whatever you gain from investment banking to your
Sure.
company. So
Sure.
starting with the skill sets, you mentioned you learn so much every day. It's taxing work, but if you're willing to learn, you grow so much as a person, as a businessman. What are some of the most important skills you learn? Is it intellectual curiosity? Is it critical thinking? What do you think you use in your day-to-day life?
I think analyzing things, how you analyze things, whether it may be a new report or about a new subject, how you look at it and dissect the information from that, or whether it may be financial information, some numbers somewhere that you look at and dissect that information. This is, I think, one of the most important things that you learn and actually can apply to anything you do in life, right? Even if you're making a decision about which house to buy, the skills that you learn, like modeling to a smaller extent, or comparison, benchmarking to a smaller extent, or using the Excel to quickly create something where you can actually make comparisons with your potential purchasing options, are the things that you can actually use in real life, right? May it be a job or may it be your personal life.
Did you ever actually model the financials for the house you were gonna buy?
Yes, I can share my screen if you want. So I recently bought a property and in London, and you should see like how I modeled, what returns I'm going to get from that, potential returns I'm going to get in how many years.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
So now, of course, the second part of my question is you said that you learned so much in IB that when you move forward, anything in life, you can use those skills. Now, of course, we talked about how you can make an Excel sheet, which is having that financial knowledge to quickly come up with numbers and analyze what your investment is and how it's going to benefit you. That's critical, especially when you're a startup, especially in these markets. Of course, 2023 and the latter part of 2022, we saw governments raise interest rates rapidly, and a lot of, especially tech startups, were in a bad position. How have you navigated this market, this whole inflationary scenario with your startup? Have you had to make hard decisions? What's your
Yes.
day to day?
So I was working with Firefly, a company, San Francisco-based company, who makes screens and puts them on top of taxis, in mostly in New York, but they're all over the US. When this crisis kind of has started to come, and I've seen how it impacted, a company which is basically in a growth mode, right? Once you see this coming and that the funding in for future rounds may be limited, you end up becoming much more careful with how you use your money, right? And that's, I think, one of the most important decisions that startups had to make. Um, you know, Once this started to happen. And you can see that there's been a lot of bigger companies who actually are laying off employees to conserve cash. Like I just saw that, while we were talking, a notification came that Meta, so the Facebook company, is laying off 10,000 people right now. And but coming back to more smaller companies, the smaller companies had started becoming much more careful with their cash, and making sure that they can show they work on the value proposition to their clients, and they're paying more attention to the value proposition to their clients than they used to, because once they can actually have they do more work on that, they can show to the investors that they are different from some of the startups that actually are just about the new hype in technology or whatever, or climate tech. And they are actually a company which has really is going to make a value, give a value to their customers. So I think this is the biggest change that has happened.
I've heard a lot of investors say that um, the best startups are born during a recession or during a bad period. It's easy to raise money when you have the founders market, when there's so many startups booming, especially as you remember in 2021. Um, so much economic stimulus, but when times get hard, that's where you test the metal, the mentality of those founders.
Yeah.
How do you, of course, now we have a lot of entrepreneurs at Boston University, and we keep having events with other schools like MIT, Harvard, and we have a good founders community in the city. Just yesterday, one of my friends, she has a similar to you, she has a climate startup, and I don't think she wants me to disclose what she's doing, but one of the problems she was having was she had a person on her team that was not bringing value to the company, and she was contemplating on how to fire him, on what to do. of course, in so many years of your professional experience, you also had a manufacturing company. You have a manufacturing company in Turkey. How do you make those hard decisions? How do you navigate that?
I think with the hard decisions, I wouldn't call those hard decisions. Like I think the hardest decisions are the ones where you actually cannot reverse the decision, right? And you know, parting ways with a person is to me is not a hard decision, right? First of all, for two reasons. One is if that person, I believe that if a person is not productive in my company, it's basically a waste of time for that person as well. So my view to life is that, parting ways with someone is also an opportunity for that person, maybe a stressful time for a short time period, but also an opportunity for that person to find something where she or he would be able to add more value and basically potentially be happier to go to work, right? If there's an underperformance, there's probably a reason. Maybe that person is not interested in that job, right? Or not excited about that job, even though I believe that there's a potential in everyone, right? That's one part of things. So about, parting ways with someone, about a decision. And also at the same time, that decision is not irreversible. You can part ways with someone and then later on you can actually hire someone new after you actually know that who you need, right? So I think the hardest decisions are the ones where about strategy, about long-term commitments of the company. And those hard long-term decisions, I think, should not be taken. So first of all, try to avoid irreversible decisions, right? And then also, if you have to make some irreversible decisions for a longer period of time, so let's say like 6 months, 1 year, 2, 3 years, then make sure that you run some experiments and you have good indicators about the fact that that decision is more likely to be successful than fail. That's how I think about making decisions.
And I think, that's an interesting perspective. I've always heard the perspective of the person who's been laid off, but, this is one of the few times where someone who has the power to um, fire people is telling me that perspective. And I agree with that, that if you're not being productive, you're probably not happy with what you're doing, or you're probably not prioritizing
Exactly.
that company or that project. So
Exactly.
it's probably healthier for them to find something else to do.
Exactly.
Um, so I remember one time we were having dinner, you told me that I mentioned that I was recruiting for a startup, and I just had a conversation with those founders, and you asked me how young were they, what experience they had. And I was like, oh, they're 24, 25, just worked a couple years at, a big hedge fund. Someone worked at a tech company, and now they're running their own, startup. So the one thing you told me was they have to let go of their egos, find a mentor or find someone who's gonna lead them through situations and understand that they're still babies. They haven't had that real world experience yet. And to build something, they need to be humble. Why do you think, of course, a lot of people say that when you're young, you should try new things. And some of the founders we've had on the podcast before, they say that, when you're 20, 21, you can always find a company, try to make a company. And if you fail, you can always go back to school because you don't have a family support, you don't have a high paying job. So it's easier to get that motivation. But
Mhm.
recently I've been having people who tell me that of course you should have a safety net, but at the same time, experience is invaluable. So what do you say to those young entrepreneurs who are listening on your personal experience, that how should they navigate making their own company? What should their thinking be? What's their mentality, and what types of experience they need? should they
Mhm.
acquire before they go ahead and start making companies?
First of all, if you have a really good idea, right, and you have to make sure that it's a really good idea, there are books that people can read about ideas like Mom Test. Don't fall in love with your idea, and make sure that you get impartial opinion from outside, from third parties, about whether your idea is actually really exciting or not. So first of all, don't fall in love with your idea, but if you really find a really good idea, I think you can make it happen. If you are a really, really hardworking, smart person who wants to make it happen with the right people on your board, or as mentors to you, or as advisors to you, you can definitely make it happen. But make sure that while you're pursuing that idea, make sure that you have people with experience in your team who have um, who can bring value in different aspects, right? You actually may be a really good, you may have a really good idea, but if you hire someone who can make it a product out of it with all the experience that they've gained from all the other companies that they have worked in, you're more likely to be successful. Or if you hire the right HR person, or if you hire the right operations person, or finance person, you will be more likely to hire to be successful. So be careful. I understand at the start, when you're going after your idea with only a few people, you don't actually have to do everything yourself, and you will learn in the meantime. But as soon as you get the traction, you have to make sure that you bring the people with expertise in, and don't fall in love with your idea and yourself, especially your ego, right? Thinking that, oh, I made it so far, so I can make it even further. Sometimes you actually need to bring the expertise from outside, even before you become a public company, right? Even before you become a series, you get your Series A funding. Um, Make use of the people in your network to get that experience if you don't have that experience. In general, though, I would definitely recommend people to get some experience in bigger companies, or bigger startups, or bigger corporations, about how the business life works, how these kind of companies approach systems and operations, how decisions are made, how ideas are analyzed before actually going for a startup at a very young age. That's in general what I would recommend people to do. But if you have a really good idea, then yeah, of course, go for it. I'm sure you can make it happen as a smart guy, but don't fall in love with yourself and the idea, because you will need expertise to actually scale that idea up.
That's why they say customer interviews are the most important part when you're making a company.
For
So
sure. Yeah, mom
this
test.
is, I
Yeah.
remember that. You recommended that book to me. Actually, it's on
I
my,
did. Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
you did.
Okay.
And it's actually on my Amazon. I don't have Kindle anymore, but
Kindle.
it's on my, I actually bought that book.
Okay.
So just to end the interview, I have two questions that my VP used to ask everybody when I was at Battery Ventures, and I find it's a really fun way to end the interview. First one is, what's your favorite book or two, and why?
Hmm. Like I like, would you say in terms of business books?
Just anything, just any book. You could say business, or you could say just for leisure.
I think I would say Scaling Up by Warren Harnish is a book that I would recommend everyone to read for understanding businesses and how to scale up businesses in a very practical way. I think that would be the book that I would 100% recommend everyone to read. Or any kind of Patrick Lencioni's books, like The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and or like The Advantage, and all those books. I love business books, so those are the ones that I want to recommend.
And my last question would be, if you had to go back in time to any time, if you were in college, Deutsche Bank, Rothschild, or even 5 years ago, what's one piece of advice you would give to yourself?
I would say approach your life or your career plan, at least, as you would approach to a business idea. Make a plan about it, strategize about it. Of course, make sure that the interests guide you, and if like go for something that you're interested in, but at the same time try to plan what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years, and come back from there and think about what your short-term plan should be. Have a personal vision, and once you have that personal vision, which is actually guided by your interests, then you can actually kind of see where that personal vision, how that personal vision is related to your career plan, and then plan the short-term steps that you have to take to get to that personal vision. That's, I think, is a very important way to approach anything in life, but very importantly, your career.
That is some fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Fahir. This has been the Stu Street Podcast. I'm Arkash Jain with Mr. Fahir Han. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. If you like our content, subscribe. The button is below. If you want to see another video, our latest one is right here, or another one right here. 2 options, 2 videos. Have a great day.